Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. War mediators say an agreement between Israel and Hamas could be reached to release the hostages as soon as Tuesday, paving way for a temporary ceasefire. Britain's Global Summit on Food Insecurity says innovations in food production could alleviate hunger for millions of people. And in our health report, officials in Zimbabwe are stepping up their effort to fight the cholera outbreak. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. An agreement between Hamas and Israel could be reached soon, as early as Tuesday, in which the militant group would release hostages and Israel would free Palestinian prisoners. Israel, the United States and Qatar, which mediates with Hamas, have been negotiating for several weeks over a hostage release that would be paired with a temporary ceasefire in Gaza and the entry of more humanitarian aid. Israel's army is widening its operations across northern Gaza, where they battered Palestinian militants Tuesday in the densely populated Jabalia refugee camp. The Israeli army released video that purportedly shows its forces have pushed further into the Gaza Strip. Hamas abducted about 240 hostages during its October 7th rampage into Israel that killed 1,200 people, mostly civilians. Nearly 13,000 Palestinians have been killed since the war began, according to the Hamas-run Palestinian health authorities, who do not differentiate between civilian and militant deaths. The White House says that it is closer than ever to a deal to release the more than 230 hostages held by Hamas. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain reports from the State Department.
With reports that a deal appears close at hand for Hamas to release the hostages it has been holding since its October 7th massacre of 1,200 Israelis, the White House said it is working on winning their release hour by hour, but did not have any news of an agreement to share Monday. As another Gaza medical facility, the Indonesian hospital, has come under Israeli attack after the Shifa hospital last week, VOA asked the White House about the attacks on hospitals.
We don't want to see hospitals as battlegrounds. We don't want to see firefights in hospitals. Now, as we've also said, at least when it comes to Al-Shifa, I don't have any intelligence on this Indonesia hospital, but at Al-Shifa, we did have intelligence that corroborated the Israeli claims that Hamas was using it as a command and control node.
Kirby said he knows the hospitals are full of sick patients unable to flee and doctors and nurses trying to take care of them. He said the problem for Israel is trying to balance that reality with the fact that Hamas uses hospitals as shields for its fighters. VOA spoke with the chairman of the Mercy organization in Jakarta that built the Indonesian hospital in Gaza.
They attacked the third floor. The ICU is a mess. Many victims. More than 700 severely injured. 12 dead, including 2 doctors, a surgeon, if I'm not mistaken.
President Joe Biden has said that after this war ends, Gaza and the West Bank should be run by the Palestinian Authority and not by Hamas, which has been designated as a terrorist group by the United States. One expert told VOA he thinks Biden has some important ideas to share, but there is no consensus right now in the region or even between the U.S. and Israel on the day after the war ends.
The U.S. also saying that there may be some sort of regional Arab force that helps police Gaza for some time, and hearing from most of the Arab foreign ministers, including Jordan's foreign minister, rejecting that notion. So there's a lot of work to be done here, both on the short-term crisis of hostages and the violence that continues, but also the longer-term vision of what does a viable end state look like.
Biden has come under increasing criticism at home and abroad for his support of Israel, amid growing outrage and desperation over the mounting death toll of Palestinian civilians. The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says more than 13,000 Palestinians have been killed by Israel since the war began last month. Cindy Sain, VOA News, the State Department.
A Gaza-based journalist told VOA of the overwhelming experience in documenting the Israeli-Hamas conflict on the besieged enclave following the October 7th attack by Palestinian militant group Hamas. Fuad Abhamash, a resident of southern Gaza, says he is embedded with an emergency team covering the war from within an ambulance. This report by VOA's Ignatius Anol contains graphic images some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
I saw a child who was the sole survivor from his entire family. Carrying this child, knowing he's now an orphan, is a heart-wrenching experience. Witnessing such scenes is something no one wants to endure. I've witnessed countless horrific incidents that have become a blur in my memory. It feels like I'm trapped in a never-ending nightmare. The sight of children's limbs, a baby's foot, and parents crying for their lost child is beyond belief. Everywhere I go, I find children's toys among the rubble, a stark reminder that these buildings were once filled with innocent children. It begs the question, are these children to blame? What have they done to deserve this? Given our responsibilities, we must remain strong and resilient. Any sign of weakness could impede our ability to perform duties effectively. We witness the horrors of war, offering assistance and documenting events as they unfold. Our goal is to support victims and be there for them in every possible way. Today, amidst the chaos, I managed to bring a smile to a little girl's face, despite her injuries and the overwhelming stress I am under. Being able to make her laugh was a truly uplifting experience. It was the best thing that has happened to me in a while.
Now to Sudan. 7 months into the conflict and no end in sight, the United Nations is raising the alarm bells on the spreading violence and the food aid that is running out of refugees. As the war rages on food and aid for more than 500,000 refugees who have fled from Sudan to Chad will run out next month without extra funding. According to a World Food Programme official, more than 540,000 refugees have crossed from Sudan into Chad since the war erupted between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, according to the International Organization for Migration. Now for more on where the United Nations stands regarding Sudan's war, I'm joined from New York by VOA UN correspondent Margaret Bishia. Hello, Margaret. Tell us, what's the position of the United Nations regarding the current situation in Sudan?
Hi, Esther. Well, they're very, very concerned. It's not going in a good direction. More than 6,000 civilians killed since fighting started in mid-April between the army and the Rapid Security Forces. More than 7 million Sudanese displaced, both inside the country and outside, as you mentioned, many going to Chad. The UN said just 8,000 alone last week went to Chad from Darfur because fighting is escalating in that region. The parties have spoken about a ceasefire, but the top Africa official at the United Nations, Martha Poby, said last week that their actions on the ground suggest otherwise. We've seen the fighting spread. West Darfur is of extreme concern right now. And in North Darfur, the RSF looks ready to advance on Al Fasher. Poby said there are many, many displaced people in Al Fasher. It could be very deadly and dangerous for them if hostilities escalate in that area. There's also concern for the ethnic Masalites in Darfur. There are disturbing and credible reports, the United Nations says, of Arab militias allied with the RSF who have been targeting ethnic Masalit in West Darfur. And the fighting is spreading. I mean, Khartoum has been very bad since April, but there's continuing to be fighting around army strongholds there, the Sudanese Armed Forces strongholds. But now the UN says fighting is spreading to Gezira, White Nile, and Kordofan states. So this crisis is just growing instead of ending. The UN has backed IGAD and the African Union initiatives to try and find some sort of ceasefire for Sudan.
Margaret, you know, the Sudan government has made it very clear that it has problems with the United Nations in recent months. It has kicked their top representatives at the UN. They also say they no longer want their political mission at the UN headquarters. So what's the status of UNITAMS, and how will this affect humanitarian aid to Sudan?
So UNITAMS is the political mission that the UN has in Sudan. And early on in the fighting, the government of Sudan basically kicked out Mr. Volker Perthes, who was the top UN official there. He headed the mission. And so since then, relations have really gone downhill. Now, on last week, on Thursday, I believe it was, the government of Sudan sent the United Nations a letter saying that the mission should shut down totally. But they said they are open to some sort of new, appropriate, and agreed upon formula for a political mission in Sudan. The mandate of the mission, which was given to it by the Security Council in 2020, will expire on December 3rd. So very little notice for the UN to sort of pivot and figure something out. Right. There will be an assessment done now to figure out some way forward. So we'll see where it goes from there. And the Secretary General also announced last week that he's appointing the former Algerian Foreign Minister, Ramtan Lamamra, as his personal envoy for Sudan. But the envoy will not be based in Sudan.
Right. Margaret, thank you very much for your reporting.
And for humanitarian work, it will continue.
All right, Margaret, thank you very much. A VOA correspondent at the United Nations headquarters, Margaret Bishia, live for us there. Now, French President Emmanuel Macron met with the leaders of Kenya and Ethiopia on the sidelines of the G20 Compact for Africa meeting in Berlin Monday. Macron held bilateral meetings with Kenyan President William Ruto and Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. Compact with Africa is based on an initiative launched by Germany during its chairmanship of the G20 group in 2017. The initiative aims to improve the economic framework conditions in the participating countries in order to make them more attractive for foreign private investment. The group of states now includes more than a dozen countries from the African continent. Uganda's new license plate tracking surveillance system is raising concerns about privacy rights and freedom of association and expression, according to a report by Human Rights Watch. The system allows the government to track the locations of all registered vehicles in real time, including foreign cars temporarily in the country. Human Rights Watch is urging the government to scrap the system. For more insight, VOA's Paul Ndiho spoke to Oriem Nyeko, the author and Uganda researcher at the Human Rights Watch, about the surveillance system.
Human Rights Watch, this past week, we put out a statement talking about Uganda's new, what they're calling the Intelligent Transport Monitoring System, which is basically a surveillance system that has been introduced in the country that includes attaching tracking devices to the number plates of every vehicle in the country. The owners of private vehicles are going to be required to register anew for these new number plates in February next year. That is going to allow the government to track their location in real time at all times.
That's scary for a lot of people, especially people who own private cars. If these were government cars, I would say sure. But you're looking at invasion of privacy here.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that it poses several risks to people's to the restriction of people's right to privacy. I mean, the authorities knowing or having the ability to locate where every vehicle is at a given time is very risky.
There are people who said that perhaps this is not a new thing. This has been going on with, of course, the introduction of the CCTV cameras that came back a couple years ago. In Kampala, you have cameras all over the streets. So there are people who would argue that this is not a new thing. It's been going on, and it's a way of Uganda trying to make sure that its citizens, its people are protected.
The government has been steadily increasing its capacity to surveil the population, first with the introduction of those CCTV cameras that you mentioned, but now they're adding to it with the number plates, and they're also adding new cameras, they say, that will have the capacity to do facial recognition and also recognize other elements in vehicles like the number plates.
Would it be fair to say, for example, I've been to countries, even here in the United States where I am, there is surveillance all over the place. Once you buy a car, it's registered in the system. Everybody knows if police stops you, they can easily pull up your record and make reference, connect your address to the ownership of the car. Now, how is this that I'm describing different from what we have in Uganda?
Yeah, it's true. Most countries in the world surveil people in some way or the other. And the difference in this particular case is that Uganda is taking it a step further by adding these tracking devices. There's no other country in the world that has the capacity to track every single vehicle in the country. It's important when we talk about surveillance to remember that the right to privacy is a right, of course, that, like most rights, can be inhibited in some way, but it has to be done in a way when it is strictly necessary, or alternatively where the surveillance matches the issue, the risk that is trying to be addressed. In this particular case, that doesn't apply. The risk that we are trying to, that the government is trying to address, just doesn't match the limitations on people's rights to privacy.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That was Oriam Nyeko, a Ugandan researcher at Human Rights Watch, speaking to VOA's Paul Ndiho. Still to come, we'll have the latest on a cholera outbreak in Zimbabwe. Stay with us.
This week on Straight Talk Africa, Liberian President George Weah has conceded the election to former Vice President Joseph Boakai. What does this mean for the future of Liberia, and what challenges lie ahead for the new president-elect? Join me, Heidi Adams, on my guests on the next Straight Talk Africa for an in-depth discussion on the road ahead for Liberia.
In other news, Joseph Boakai is the new president-elect of Liberia. On Monday, he was declared winner of the presidential election, narrowly defeating incumbent George Weah, according to the National Electoral Commission. The commission says Boakai won with 50.6% of the vote against 49.3% of the vote for Weah. Guinea's military junta is ordering a probe into ousted President Alpha Condé, the country's first democratically elected leader, for treason following ongoing negotiations into alleged killings, torture, kidnapping, and rape. Condé, who was toppled in a September 2021 coup after more than a decade in power, has been living in exile in Turkey. And the United Nations Food Agency warned Tuesday that food assistance to 1.4 million refugees in Chad who fled the conflict in parts of the Sahel could end because of limited funding. Most of the refugees escaped the war in Sudan and crossed into Chad in the last 6 months, according to the UN World Food Programme. Britain hosted a global summit on food insecurity Monday and says that innovations in food production could alleviate hunger for millions of people. But critics say the focus on technology ignores the real driver of food shortages, growing inequality and poverty. Henry Ridgewell reports from London.
Somalia is among the countries worst hit by food insecurity. Some 113,000 people have been forced to flee their homes after extreme rainfall caused extensive flooding in recent days. The floods come a year after Somalia suffered its worst drought in 40 years. The Somali president was among the delegates attending the Global Food Security Summit in London on Monday. The host, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, said mobilising global finance and partnerships to drive innovation would alleviate food insecurity.
To drive cutting-edge research on flood-tolerant rice, disease-resistant wheat and much more. These innovations will reach millions across the poorest countries.
Sunak said climate change, conflict, the aftermath of COVID-19 and Russia's invasion of Ukraine are the main drivers of current food insecurity. But can new technology end global hunger? It's one tool in the box, says analyst Steve Wiggins at the Overseas Development Institute.
The fundamentals of global hunger are the fundamentals of poverty, marginalisation, and people being in situations of extraordinary vulnerability. Those are the fundamentals of hunger, and that's what we have to drive towards. Of course, there are technical advances that we get that we're very happy for, which make things a little bit easier.
Those include innovations like solar-powered irrigation in Mali, says Wiggins.
So if you want to pump water onto your fields, it's becoming increasingly easy without having to spend money on diesel to do so.
Critics say the focus on technology ignores the main driver of food insecurity.
Technological solutions tend to focus on the supply side, so kind of, new tech and for agriculture and supply chains and so on. But what we actually need to do is to tackle the inequalities that lie behind that hunger. Possibly the simplest thing to do is actually to give people food or to give people the money to go out and purchase food in markets themselves.
Outside the summit, pro-Palestinian protesters highlighted the growing humanitarian crisis in the war-torn Gaza Strip. The United Nations has warned that food and water supplies are running perilously low as Israel continues to restrict aid shipments into the territory following the October 7th attack by Hamas militants. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
It's time for our health report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu with the latest on a cholera outbreak. Hello, Lino.
Hello, Esther. Hello, everyone. Zimbabwe's health ministry is warning Harare city officials to clean up the streets as citizens experience a widespread cholera outbreak. The outbreak sweeping across the country is taking the lives of both the young and the old, with over 8,000 suspected cholera cases and more than 1,200 cases confirmed by a laboratory, according to the health ministry. Although cholera has receded in the past few months, the disease has recently made a resurgence. Zimbabwe has recorded more than 500 cases a week since late October, marking the highest rate recorded since February, according to the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Cholera is a waterborne disease caused by ingesting contaminated food or water and can kill within hours if left untreated.
We are very angry with the city of Harare by the way they are doing it. We also blame the city health department. They are not giving people the information they should know about cholera and typhoid. Even those diarrheal cases, people don't have the information. Some don't even know the signs and symptoms of cholera, signs and symptoms of typhoid. So people are just falling sick in their house.
There are a lot of things that are going to take place. We want to make sure that all the garbage is collected. We want to make sure that all these illegal street vendors are removed. We have warned them, and we are also giving this task to city. If they don't take action, government is coming in to remove illegal vendors. And we have also asked town council to go and clear all those illegal fields which are being irrigated using raw sewage. There are vegetables which are being sold. We don't know where, but we understand some of them are going to Mbari Msika. Lettuce, rugare, cucumbers, and mbora. All these are being irrigated using sewage water. So, yes, we have to take it as an emergency to make sure that things are sorted out.
Zoonotic diseases or zoonoses are becoming more and more common. Zoonoses, which have a wildlife reservoir, are a significant public health issue that affects all continents. Experts say hundreds of pathogens from animals can infect people in many different modes of transmission, posing a threat to public health. I spoke with Kadu Sebunya, Chief Executive Officer of the African Wildlife Foundation, to discuss the significance of wildlife as a reservoir for zoonoses and how it impacts on conservation efforts.
COVID taught us very, very lessons, which we knew from science, but it was not public. That actually, when you mismanage wildlife, when you mishandle, when you have a poor relationship with wildlife and wildlands, zoonotic diseases will come out and they can close your economy, they can change your livelihood. In fact, the conversation we are having now with some of the political leaders is that conservation is the firewall. Our work is the firewall between the zoonotics and human life. We do conservation well, you let us do our work, you finance our work. What we do actually is to keep the zoonotic diseases, the viruses, where they belong, on wildlife and in wild places. We don't. A lot of people thought that conservation actually is just about animals. No, it's about our health. It's about our food security. It's about our economies. It's about our water. It's about our life. It's not about animals or tree huggers. We are the firewall between these zoonotic diseases. And this is what actually another lesson we learned from COVID, that actually wildlife doesn't need management. You leave it alone, it will manage itself. It doesn't need human species to take care of it. Our work, going back to our pillars, is how do we work with people, human species, to change our mindset and behaviors and our relationship with wildlife and wildlands so that we can coexist on this planet. And that is the talk about Ebola, talk about COVID, talk about HIV. All these are zoonotic diseases that are supposed to be in the world. And there are more if we don't change our behavior. So our work is a health issue. It's a food security issue. It's a water issue. It's an agriculture issue. It's about our survival of a species. That's what conservation is.